What we're looking at over the next, say, between now and 2016, New Zealand's population will grow by about 7%. At 65 plus years, it will grow by 26%. All other age groups combined, 4.5%. Between now and 2026, New Zealand's population will grow by around 16%. That's on these Series 5 projections with the 10,000 net migration gain every year and the birth rate remaining about what it is at the moment and just falling a little bit. Numbers over the age of 65 will grow by 71%, all other age groups combined by only 7.6%. So you start to see the nature of the challenge that we have ahead. We're going to go through three very important structural crossovers, and when demographers see lines crossing over on graphs, they get very excited. We've never had more elderly than children in our populations before, but we will have that in just over a decade in New Zealand. Not because the numbers of children are declining, but because the numbers over the age of 65 are increasing as I and my fellow baby boom colleagues move into old age. About 10 years after you have more elderly than children, you actually reach a point of natural decline where you have more deaths than births. Something else that it's another story slightly tangential to the one I'm telling you today, but into the future it means basically the end of growth in terms of the total population. What does it mean? One speaker this morning referred to these ratios of the working age per elderly person. If you go back to the start of our development of our welfare state, we had around almost 16 people at working age per elderly person. Today we have 5, and by 2030 we will have under 3. So again, huge challenges. But one of the biggest opportunities that I see, and this is really an important message for our employers out there and for the labour market, I think there's a lot of complacency in New Zealand about our population. Our birth rate is the highest in the developed world, as was mentioned this morning. Population is still growing. Net migration was positive last year by about 14 or 15,000, but for a reason that I'll explain in just a moment, our labour market entry to exit ratio is declining very, very rapidly. These are the numbers of entrants aged 15 to 24 and people in the retirement zone 55 to 64. Now we know, as we've heard again this morning, that older New Zealanders work on longer, but if we increase this band from say 55 to 64, move it up to 57 to 67, something like that, it only pushes the crossover off a couple of years. It doesn't change the situation. What we're going to see is a situation where you have fewer people entering the labour market than leaving. And again, I remind you that these projections include a net migration gain of 10,000 every year. So the migration doesn't get us out of this one either. If we go back just a couple of decades, we had something like 21 young people entering the labour market for every 10 leaving. Today across New Zealand we have 14 entering the labour market for every 1 leaving. But across New Zealand, across the territorial authorities, labour market entry-exit ratios are already negative in nearly 40%. So that's across the 74 territorial authorities. You look at data like this is for New Zealand as a whole. But once you break it down, you look at the South Island, you look at Northland, you already have, in many parts of the South Island, only 8 young people entering the labour market for every 10 leaving. What does it mean? It means that we're moving into an incredibly new situation, and that is a long-term, demographically tight labour market. I've just come back from 15 years in Australia, so these are some headlines out of Australian papers, but I know it's the same here in several areas, some of those areas that I was just referring to. A tight labour market where you have fewer people entering the labour market than leaving means that we have to look at the things that we're looking at here in a rather different way. When you have great competition for young people to enter the labour market, and really what I call the all hands to the pump model, where we're going to require all New Zealanders to be working. This is a very, very different welfare state perspective that we need to look at. And this is the point that I really want to make. This is this age structure that we have now. We have, you see, an hourglass shape occurring. This is the net migration loss of young adults, mostly to Australia over the past few decades. Even when New Zealand has a net migration gain, you can still lose young people, and that is what's been happening. Young people have been voting with their feet, going over there, earning higher incomes to, say, pay for their student loans and so on, and not coming back in the numbers that they used to. Or if young people are leaving, they're not being replaced by people of the same age from elsewhere. So the first thing is we have this deep bite that has occurred in our age structure. The baby boomers start turning 65 next year, as most of you would know. As they move out of the labour market, who are you going to call? We've got a big hole following them. So as they move out, this is going to create a vacuum in the labour market, and it will suck our young people in. And by the way, it's sucking them across the Tasman. I've said recently that it's like a vacuum cleaner over there, sucking our young people over there. But young people will be in great demand and relatively short supply. Now we have two demographic dividends that we can use to get us through this if we understand that and if we invest in them now. The first was born around 1990, our first baby blip. Well, it's the grandchildren of the baby boomers when they were born. Secondly, there's a little blip occurring now. If you look at those data here, this cohort, as I say, we're going to return to a labour market situation of the 50s and 60s, talking about the relatively low proportion on benefits in the 1960s. Something like 2% was mentioned this morning, but in 1956 there were 12 people on an unemployment benefit in New Zealand, and it said that the government knew them all by name. That's probably the situation that we're looking at in the future. So it's a wonderful thing, but we have to understand what we need to do about it. This cohort, this 1991 cohort, is absolutely critical to New Zealand's future. If we don't invest in that cohort now, and it leaves the country and doesn't come back, look what's following it. We've got 10 to 15 years of diminishing labour market entrance as the baby boomers move out into the labour market. That is not what I would call the demographic gift, where we have a lovely fat bulge in our age structure to all the taxpayers to support the ageing population. We have got a hole in our age structure, and if that cohort goes, we are in deep trouble. So what I would say is critically important that we understand the importance of that cohort, try and keep it here, or give everyone a ticket, send them overseas and get them back as fast as possible to, start working and paying for my pensions. And then we have this other young cohort coming through down the bottom here, which is about to enter school, and what we do with that cohort will also have huge importance for New Zealand's future. My last slide is just to also overlay on that overall age structure what's actually driving some of those different wiggles in it. Our Māori population is extremely young, median age of 22. Half the population is under the age of 22. Compare that to the European New Zealander population, where median age is around about 38. Young Māori cohort will disproportionately comprise the labour force of the future. Under the age of 15, young Māori make up 3 in every 10 Māori and European. Critically important that we understand the educational needs of that population, and I think if we invest in those younger cohorts now, not only will they help to pay for our pensions, but by being fully employed and well paid over the future, they'll be able to support themselves when they get there.